curse this time. Oh, wait, we're live? Oh, crap.
We are live. Hello, everyone. This is My 2 Cents, and welcome back to Today with 2 Cents, wrapping up your weekly news. I apologize we haven't had one of these in a while. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of stuff I've wanted to discuss. But this week, there certainly was some news. Some of it widely reported, some of it not so widely reported. But myself and Night Shift 10,000, Pipsqueak, and the Dark Conservatarian, three of my longest, most loyal patrons, are here to discuss what's going on. So let's jump right into it. I'm going to start with a story that I'm sure you heard about, but probably not a lot, because amidst all the stories going on, this one has received some of the least amount of mainstream media attention, and I think it will become clear immediately that there's a reason for that. So this past weekend, Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest producers of oil, and ever since the 1970s, one of the U.S.'s biggest allies in maintaining the international petrodollar, suffered a drone attack on one of their main oil production facilities. Now, this attack destroyed several critical locations. It was very tactically well employed. Whoever did it clearly has highly advanced military capabilities. Now, the Houthi rebels in the state of Yemen, for those who don't know, Yemen is currently undergoing a civil war between the Sunni Yemen government and the Shia Houthi rebels, who are known to be backed by the government of Iran. The Houthi rebels took, and of course, the Yemeni government is supported by Saudi Arabia. Yemen is effectively a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Well, the Houthi rebels in Yemen took credit for the attack, but now, as the BBC and other news outlets have reported, the United States has officially declared that, U.S. intelligence has declared that the attack definitely came from within the borders of Iran. This is ironic because President Trump recently fired John Bolton, his national security advisor, who was well known for his desire to go to war with Iran. And
his war hawkishness.
Yes, his war hawkishness. He was one of the ones who, along with now deceased Senator John McCain, was singing a bomb, 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 Iran. Little clever play on the Beach Boys song Barbara Ann. But just after he's out now, potentially, there is pretense for war with Iran. Never mind the fact that Saudi Arabia is obviously a absolute monarchy, Islamic state that is well known to torture political dissidents, kill journalists like Jamal Khashoggi, and is generally a human rights abusing country, but the United States doesn't really care because they are useful to U.S. interests. Iran, on the other hand, is very strongly aligned against the United States, and while it is a oppressive, evil regime in many of the same ways that Saudi Arabia is, it is not willing to advance U.S. interests, and in fact has acted against them, and thus the U.S. would like to, and has for a long time, ever since 1979, when the Shah of Iran, the U.S.-backed puppet, was overthrown by the current government of Iran. The CIA and other U.S. intelligence has been looking for ways to change the regimes within Iran. So everyone's ought to be asking, well, who really conducted this attack? And it's clear from the mainstream media message that goes out that there are powerfully placed people who have a vested interest in it being true that Iran conducted the attack. Now, I am obviously not in a position to assess whether or not what really happened here. But as I've always said, if you want to really know, in these kinds of international conflicts, if you want to know what's really going on, the question you have to ask is who really stands to benefit the most by what happens. Well, we know that the international price of oil skyrocketed immediately following this. The Saudis went from producing like 9 million barrels of oil today to 5 million barrels, which raised a significant price in oil. President Trump offered to dip into the United States strategic oil reserves in order to prevent this, and that lowered oil prices somewhat, but certainly not back to where they were. And one has to ask the question, what would Iran really stand to gain from this? Because at best, you disrupt Saudi oil production, but you also potentially create situations where you're going to deal with an international war with Saudi Arabia, which will undoubtedly be backed by the United States. And I've said this on previous live streams, but I don't think that Iran really is interested in international warfare. I think, yes, they would like to rule the entire Middle East as a Shia Islamic state, but at the end of the day, they really just want to control their own people. Iran has undergone 2 coups within the past century, and given its geographic location, how it's cut off from the rest of the Middle East, and historically, we can see from those military commanders like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, who did attempt to conquer Iran, Iran's greatest threat will always be coup from its own people, not any kind of outside invading force. So it really doesn't, to me, make any sense that Iran would have conducted this attack directly. But, of course, I'm always willing to have a discussion. If anyone has any thoughts other than what I provide, by all means, chime in.
Well, I don't have any observations about the attack, as I have researched actually none about it. But about the whole Yemen thing, you have 2 powers that are known for funding terrorist organizations, like funding their own sides in a civil war that is not related to their nation. Well, imagine my shock on that one. And I do just want to comment very quickly that I am rather approving of John Bolton's firing. I've made it like a quick video on that. I mean, in the North Korean peace talks, they're going, well, they aren't going the most swimmingly, but they would have been a whole lot worse if, like, Trump had actually buckled and followed John Bolton's words of just invading North Korea. So that I am glad for, and I'm glad that Trump has not followed any words of advice from John Bolton, if he did give any anyways, to go to war with Iran. I would say that North Korea is more dangerous than Iran as far as who to go to war with, but all the same, I don't see the interest for going to war with Iran or with, well, North Korea, really.
Is there any possibility that this might have been some kind of a false flag attack from Saudi Arabia, that they were bombing their own oil derricks for, I don't know, to increase the price or to increase the demand? Is there any possibility that they were trying to pull something like that?
It's certainly possible. I obviously don't know if there's any direct evidence at this point that something like that took place. I wouldn't put it past them, though, because, again, Saudi Arabia has a vested interest in the destruction of the current Iranian regime. And if this kind of attack were to prompt the United States to take military action against Iran or Israel or any other country that has a stated interest in the fall of the Iranian regime, that definitely would be a benefit to the Saudis. It would also get rid of an international competitor in the oil market. So if Iran were to be destroyed by this, the Saudis definitely would have an interest in that. I don't know of any evidence that's actually exists as to this point that's the case, but they would stand to gain an interest from it. I also find it a coincidence, like I said, that this came shortly after John Bolton was fired, given there has been a great deal of push within U.S. intelligence and other national security circles for the United States to go to war with Iran for a while. But another thing I thought that was interesting, and this was ironically reported by the Washington Post, so take with it what you will, but the Washington Post pointed out that President Trump has been pressuring the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates in order to continue economic growth, because recently the United States economy has taken several downturns which are signaling the coming recession. And as President Obama did, ironically, Trump wants the Fed to cut interest rates in order to continue that economic growth. Well, if there is a war as a result of the spiking oil prices, like that could be prompted by this attack on Saudi Arabia, the Fed would have a vested interest in either not cutting interest rates or possibly even raising interest rates, because higher prices at the pump would potentially lead to higher inflation, or at least that's what was reported by the Washington Post. Now, whether or not you agree with the reasoning that was reported there, it's worth noting that on the subject of inflation, like going back to World War I in Weimar Germany, during World War I, the German government increased the currency supply by about 400%, but during the war, inflation didn't occur. And the reason for that is because during times of uncertainty and warfare, people have a tendency to save more than they spend. So in an uncertain time like World War I, even though the government was printing tons of money to fund the war effort, people were by and large saving the money that they were receiving. And for that reason, inflation didn't occur. And there are those that have proposed that we already know that this the central banking system that led to that in Weimar Germany is used by virtually every country in the world, including the United States. And the dollar has lost virtually 100% of its value since the creation of the Federal Reserve. And the United States needs policy options in its pocket to prevent that cash from flowing into the United States and being used and causing a hyperinflation. One of those potentially is war. If the Fed is at any point scared that Americans are going to finally waking up to what's going on, realizing that the dollar is worthless and that the United States government has continued to devalue it, a large-scale war in which tons of money then gets poured out of the country into a foreign shore war and creates lots of global uncertainty, potentially could hold that off longer. So it's at least possible in principle that someone, be it U.S. intelligence themselves, be it the Saudis, be it anyone else that has global economic aspirations, wants this kind of thing to happen in order to stave off the coming global economic collapse.
Testing 1 2 3. Does my mic sound a whole lot better?
Yeah,
it does on my end.
All right. I thought I'd just ask because apparently, sorry about that, everybody. Apparently, I had my mic settings set up to where my audio intake was through my webcam's mic and not my actual mic. But anyway, so my question on that. If we were to become less reliant on Saudi's oil and instead become reliant on our own oil reserves, would that have any kind of would that relieve any of the pressures or whatnot? Would that make a recession less likely at all?
Well, I think I think when we say recession less likely, at this point, there's nothing that can stop the coming recession. At best, it's a question of how long they can hold it off. And if the U.S. became more dependent on its own oil, at least in the short term, I wouldn't presume to know, but I'd say the main thing, the reason Saudi Arabia has been so important to strategic U.S. foreign policy is the fact that they've been one of the key players that helps maintain the international petrodollar. In that all countries around the world, in order to buy and sell oil, you must buy and sell oil using the dollar. And this is why every country in the world to this point has continued to use the dollar as its reserve currency, even though we're seeing more and more countries are either rejecting the dollar as the reserve currency or at least flirting with the idea of rejecting the dollar. And were the U.S. to lose a strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia, that potentially is in jeopardy. So I think and that's obviously why, despite all of Saudi Arabia's human rights abuses, despite their state sponsoring of terrorism, murdering of political dissidents, and whatever else, the U.S. will never speak out against Saudi Arabia or publicly oppose them in any fashion.
My question on that is, if we were to become completely unreliant on Saudi's own oil, would that make us less reliant on the petrodollar, and would Saudi's oil affect less our own interest rates and inflation rates and all that stuff?
Okay. Well, the only problem with that is that the United States.
Well, that was a question I was asking.
Okay.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Matt Schiff.
Well, it's like the United States doesn't have nearly the amount of oil within it that Saudi Arabia does. So I mean, it might work early on, but it probably wouldn't be a lasting thing.
Okay, and again, too, it's not just about the supply of oil that the United States needs. It's about every country around the world needs some measure of oil, and if other nations reject the petrodollar, they will start selling their dollar reserves in favor of some other currency, like the Chinese yuan, perhaps. And when they start selling their dollar reserves, those dollars come back flooding back into the United States. As the money supply rises that rapidly, you get a hyperinflation. And once, as happened in Germany, once people lose faith in the dollar, once they realize, hey, the dollar's worthless, then no matter what policy action the government takes, it's unlikely they're going to be able to save themselves. And that's exactly what happened.
It's other countries' use of our own dollars or our own currency that is keeping our currency afloat as far as inflation goes.
That would be my opinion, yes. If someone disagrees, I'm willing to hear that argument.
No, that's a large part of it. There are other factors that go into it, but yes, if other countries stopped using our dollar, or if the U.S. dollar was kind of devalued in a way that people stopped using it, then yeah, it would lose a ton of its value. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't
Pipsqueak, do you have anything to say?
No, not really that much.
Okay. All right. Well, we will see what happens with that. President Trump has more or less hinted that he's not interested in war with Iran, but it is clear there are deep state actors that are. So we will see what ultimately pans out. Moving on.
Unless Trump is lying.
Yeah, unless, of course, he's lying. I'm not inclined to think he's actually lying about that, because one of his big campaign promises was ending U.S. intervention. Well, I shouldn't say that per se. He was a lot more isolationist than, say, President George W. Bush or any of the other Bush-era Republicans. Rejecting Bush's foreign policy was one of his campaign promises, and I think if he went back on that now, it would potentially harm him in the 2020 election. But still, there are powerfully placed individuals who clearly have.
He's kind of also promised before to preserve our gun rights, and yet
that's exactly
he says that he's and then later he says that he is open to the possibility of renewing the assault weapons ban.
Yeah,
yes,
that's what I was also going to bring up the red flag laws, and if he implemented those now nationwide, how big do you think his chances of being reelected would be?
Mm-hmm.
That would alienate a lot of his base, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
know.
You gotta remember. Hang on, if I may, you gotta remember that Democrats do have people like Tulsi Gabbard who are very anti-interventionist. Even though the DNC is trying to do everything that it can to get those kinds of people off the ticket, which is why they'll lose the next election, by the way, in my opinion. But I don't think this is something that Trump could go back on. I think this is a case of the interests of the individual person who is trying to get reelected. Essentially, that's what every politician's goal is, to get reelected. And his interests in it, he believes that if he stays on his guns on this one, he's going to get reelected. But this, of course, directly contrasts with the interests of the state at large.
Mm-hmm. All right. Definitely a lot more to be said about that, but there are some other things I want to discuss. So moving on. Everyone will remember last year I had quite a bit to say about the Brett Kavanaugh trial and the obviously false allegations that were made against him by Deborah Ramirez, Julie Swetnick, but chiefly Christine Blasey Ford. I wrote an article on my blog called "I Believe Christine Blasey Ford is Lying. Here's Why." If any of you want to check that out, I still stand by everything I said in that article. But what's interesting is of the three people who made allegations against Kavanaugh, the one that was held up as the most credible was Christine Blasey Ford. She claims that sometime in the early 1980s, when Brett Kavanaugh was 17 and she was 15, she was at a party and he and his friend Mark Judge held her down on a bed. Her close friend Leland Ingham, now Leland Kaiser, was at this party, as were two other individuals she named. All those individuals, including her close friend Leland Kaiser, said they had no memory of this party. Now, everyone probably heard that this past weekend, the New York Times released an article in which a shocking new allegation was made against Kavanaugh by a nonprofit owner who turns out to be a Clinton-connected lawyer, but they didn't mention that. Said he had knowledge that at a different party when Kavanaugh was in college, friends of Kavanaugh pushed his penis into another female's hand. So not Kavanaugh directly, but friends of Kavanaugh pushed Kavanaugh's penis into another female's hand. And yes, that is what allegedly this guy witnessed. And within several hours of this article being released, most of the major Democratic presidential candidates all called out Kavanaugh, saying this new evidence brings this back to the forefront. We need to get Kavanaugh impeached, and even now, impeach Kavanaugh is still trending on Twitter.
I got a couple of things about that. First of all, this is being sourced from a Clinton-connected lawyer, you say?
Yes. The New York Times did not report that fact. They just said it was a nonprofit owner, but it turns out that this nonprofit owner, I believe his name is Steyer, is in fact a Clinton-connected lawyer.
And second thing, the way that I heard Ben Shapiro word it is that he said that the one friend of Kavanaugh grabbed Brett's junk and like thrusted it into the girl. Like if it, that would like require some yanking. I mean, if that was the case, then that would make it extra painful. But saying that he was just shoved, that would make a whole lot more sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, do people really believe this crap? Are they seriously buying into this?
Yes, Beto O'Rourke, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, all calling this credible and further evidence that Kavanaugh needs to be impeached. Of course, this stems from the whole Me Too, believe all women, only 2% of sexual assault allegations are false, yada, yada, yada. Incidentally, for those of you who are interested, I just published an article on my blog, Are Only 2% of Sexual Assault Allegations False?, in which I go over the data from the studies that are cited and show that is absolute baloney. But more to the point, the New York Times did not report that in the forthcoming book that is about to be released, from which this story came, it also noted that, again, this is coming from a Clinton-connected lawyer who at best is a third-party witness to this incident. They attempted to contact the female who allegedly this was done to, and she refused to make a comment or be interviewed. Friends of that female say that the female had told them that she has no memory that this incident ever occurred. So at best, you only have one person claiming this happened. He is not the victim, and the person he has identified the victim is refusing to talk. Others who are friends of the victim are reporting that she says she has no memory of this event and it never happened. So this is not some kind of breaking bombshell story that absolutely sheds new light on credibility against Kavanaugh.
Yeah, and I heard Ben Shapiro and Andrew Klavan both comment that the New York Times article was laughed at for being so uncredible that they had to like put in a little edit in their own article to say, oh, but the rapist says that she doesn't even remember the incident, to try to I guess try to smooth out their own credibility, but that just ended up backfiring and making things worse. It kind of degenerates their own story when they say, yeah, she doesn't remember.
The New York Times, we already knew the New York Times is no longer credible. But the worst part of this, and I was talking earlier about what Christine Blasey Ford's story was, is because this very same book that they reported it from also has features an interview with Leland Kaiser, formerly Leland Ingham, the close lifelong friend of Christine Blasey Ford, whom she identified as being at the party with her the night that she was assaulted by Kavanaugh. Back when this happened, Leland Kaiser issued a statement through her lawyer that said, simply put, I do not know Brett Kavanaugh, and I was never at a party where he was present, with or without Dr. Ford. Later on, the Washington Post, I believe, reported that she did follow up and say she believes the incident, but she cannot remember it. And she was questioned by Rachel Mitchell when she testified before Congress as to why is it that this close, lifelong friend of yours cannot recall this very traumatic, important event in your life. And she said that her friend was suffered from health issues. Well, in this book, Leland Kaiser, in an actual interview, stated that from the start, she never believed this. She says Christine Blasey Ford's story did not make sense. She remembers the kinds of gatherings that the two of them went to together in high school, and this gathering did not sound anything like it. Further, she said, I never would have went to a party where me and Christine were the only girls, and when I saw that she'd left, there's no way I would have stuck around or not asked her about it later. And as it happens, the son of Leland Kaiser has now started a GoFundMe page in which he has stated he wants to raise money for Leland Kaiser's health problems because she has suffered a great deal of psychological trauma from this, specifically because people within Christine Blasey Ford's circle pressured her to lie. They wanted her to say that she remembers the party, even though she didn't, in an effort to boost Christine Blasey Ford's credibility.
Yeah, so, how long do you think it'll be before they offer her money to basically go after Kavanaugh?
Well, at this point, I think the damage is done because it's been reported. But there's at least evidence from text messages that she was threatened that news would come out about her health problems and or that she was an addict if she refused to go against Kavanaugh, which is tampering with a witness and is illegal.
Yeah, I know that we were talking about as to how that Trump's fairly anti-gun reputation has kind of hurt his own chances of getting reelected. But this whole thing, I mean, whoever among the Democratic nominees is like pushing this narrative with this lax of evidence regarding Kavanaugh, they're going to be hurting their own chances of in 2020, and just the Democrats be hurting themselves in general. Like, it's looking like that the elections is going to be who can get damaged the most, not who can look good the most.
Yeah, I would say so. But I talked about this at the time, but it again comes to the forefront. Juanita Broderick and Leslie Mills, two women credibly who have stories of being assaulted by Bill Clinton, and they have far more evidence than Christine Blasey Ford ever did, are still being ignored by the Democratic politicians. And despite the believe all women #MeToo mantra. So it again shows that this was never really about believing women. This was never really about an honest quest for evidence. This is all a political hackery about getting a more liberal justice on the Supreme Court. And anyone with half a brain can see it.
Political gain.
Mm-hmm. Anyways, given as much as I talked about that when it happened, I couldn't resist but to talk about that. Go head to my2centsvideos.com. You can see my recent article, Are Only 2% of Sexual Assault Allegations False? And if you type in the search bar, I believe Dr. Christine Blasey Ford is lying, you can read more about what I had to say when that was going on.
I do have one last question, though. Do we have any word of anyone else out there mentioning as to how Kavanaugh pretty much, to put it simply, supports NSA spying?
We did talk about that somewhat, and I do not support Kavanaugh. I've actually not been particularly pleased with some of his rulings.
No, I get that.
But really, my support for Kavanaugh is more as a man falsely accused of sexual assault.
Yeah, I'm just asking about any other political icons out there, political talking heads, because as far as I know, there is not one. I mean, certainly I haven't heard of Ben Shapiro or anyone else go talking about that side of the whole thing, but everybody's just distracted with the rape story. Again, apparently. And I do want to, congratulate 2 Cents, give him where credit is due for being like one of the very few talking heads, as small as he is, though, for mentioning the whole thing about him supporting NSA spying, which, yeah, congratulations on your credibility right there. Not mean to brown nose, but it's just my own observation that you're like one of the few, very few, that mentions that side of the story.
Okay, well, thank you. The Supreme Court itself is an extremely corrupt institution that has been used to subvert the Constitution on numerous occasions. So, no love for Kavanaugh on that front, no love for the Supreme Court itself, but I do support him in as much as he's clearly been falsely accused and is getting dragged through the mud for it. I really wish, I understand why he's not, but I really wish Kavanaugh would sue Blasey Ford for defamation, as well as Julie Swetnick and Deborah Ramirez and all these other women.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, the final news story that I wanted to talk about today, Ilhan Omar, the Democratic representative from the state of Minnesota, Somali immigrant who has become a famous member of what has come to be called the Squad, the young progressive politicians in the Democratic Party led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Wait, I thought Ilhan Omar was like born in the U.S.
Off the top of my head, I don't remember if she was. I'm pretty sure she was born in Somalia. In any case, she is of Somali descent. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure she was actually immigrated from Somalia. In any case, she is a Somali of Somali descent, Democratic representative from Minnesota. She's been extremely critical of President Trump. Well, most of the Democratic Party is, but she comes from the AOC, very progressive, pushing all those, pushing the cultural Marxism that Night Shift and I talked about in our collab regarding AOC's new spectrum of privilege. She's been a speaker on that forefront. She also was made famous when she referred to 9/11 as "some people did something" when speaking to the Council on American-Islamic Relations, which is an unindicted co-conspirator in a plot to fund the terrorist group Hamas. But she has also, the mainstream media has largely ignored this, but it has been reported by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. There are allegations that she married her own brother in an effort to commit some form of financial fraud. She also was in the news recently because it came out that she is a homewrecker. She has been her husband. She is divorced from her husband, who is not her brother. She has been divorced from her husband, who might be her brother. And then a Washington D.C. a longtime gentleman, I believe his first name was Tim, stated publicly that he had been having an extramarital affair with Ilhan while she was in D.C. And he's himself a married man with children. Now, today, Imam Muhammad Tawhidi, which is at Imam of Peace on Twitter, tweeted out that Ilhan Omar deleted a tweet on Father's Day in which she said, "Happy Father's Day to my Abo Nur Saeed. I am forever grateful to Allah for giving me the best father." Imam Muhammad Tawhidi points out that most Americans are not familiar with the fact that in Muslim countries, the surname is actually the name of your father. And so Ilhan in this tweet stated that her father's name is Nur Saeed. Well, the man that she was married to, who she was accused of that person being her brother's surname is Nur Saeed. Ahmed Nur Saeed, or Ahmed Nur Saeed. I think I'm pronouncing that right. If it is true that her own father's name is Nur Saeed, then that would all but prove that the man she was married to was in fact her brother, and she did commit incest and fraud. Well, I shouldn't say incest. Who knows what they actually did together? But she legally married her own brother for some form of financial scam. She's a homewrecker. She married her own brother, and now the fact that she deleted this tweet more or less confirms that. Because if it wasn't true, why on earth did she delete that tweet? But I'll just say what goes around comes around again. She's accused everyone and their mother of being racist for opposing her. She's said rather anti-Semitic things on multiple occasions. And anytime criticism comes with her, she's just being unfairly targeted because she's a woman, because she's Muslim, because she's a person of color. I think I saw another tweet today that was clearly sad. Well, it was a satirical tweet, but a conservative female was saying, "Come on, women, aren't we all being too hard on Ilhan? I mean, haven't all of us married our brothers at one time or another and committed financial fraud? Haven't all of us advocated the genocide of Jews? Haven't all of us, and basically listing off all these things Ilhan does. And for somebody who is constantly calling President Trump out for being a racist, and being corrupt, campaign finance violations, she sure is an example of the pot calling the kettle black.
Oh, this is so funny right here. This story is.
Yeah, this is great.
Married her own brother.
Yes, it's still unclear exactly what that was for, although they said evidence points to some form of death scheme that required her to be married.
By the way, I do want to take back what I said earlier. Apparently what I'm so far seeing is that she was born in Mogadishu, Somalia, so my bad.
I thought so.
Oh, joy.
Cody Forat says in the comments section, but unfortunately politicians are not held accountable for their actions and policies. You are correct. Most of them are not. Sometimes if it is useful to deep state actors to hold them accountable, then they will be, but very rarely.
And Axum asks if any of us watched Dragon Ball.
Dragon Ball Z, I have not in a long time, although I have.
I do not, have never, probably will never. Sorry, weebs.
Anyway, so a lot going on in the world right now. We will see how the whole Saudi Arabia thing affects the value of the dollar and whether or not the coming recession happens sooner or later. And whether or not the United States goes to war with Iran. I guess if nobody else has any comments, those were the three things I wanted to discuss, and we will move on to the final matter of the show.
My only comment towards that whole story about Ilhan Omar is raffle.
All right. Well, I gotta apologize in advance, guys. I've been trying to screen share with StreamYard, and I can't manage to do it. And well, it's not so much that I can't screen share; it's that I can't have other web browsers open while screen sharing because it slows down StreamYard substantially and gets me kicked out of my own stream. But we do have a weekly hottie, so somebody give me a drum roll. This week's weekly hottie is Kaylee K. I just shared the link to the YouTube video with the footage I was going to show, so unfortunately you will have to check it out yourself. But the link is there in the chat, and I will post it in the comments section once the stream is done rendering when this is over. And hopefully we will come up with a better option for sharing weekly hotties on these streams. So.
What I'm seeing so far is that she's got a bit of an ass.
All right.
Oh, cursor right there.
I'll let that one slide. She does. I know Darkon is more of a fan of the women with a bit more meat on their bones. So.
Indeed.
Night Shift, you back?
Yeah, sorry about that. What I missed?
Night Shift?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, beautiful. What I missed?
Nothing. I was Darkon was just noticing, saying he has he's liking the butt on the young lady I shared for the weekly hottie.
Okay, good.
All right.
Hey, did you see that those two girls that I posted on the Discord?
Yes, man. Dang.
Okay. Yeah. My thoughts exactly, bro.
Exactly. Yes. On that note, if you would like to join my Discord server, there is a chat channel titled Weekly Hotties where suggestions can be posted for the show. So,
hey, Darkon, I just wanted to ask. A few weeks ago, you reminded me of a video that you thought I was going to do, and it was actually something I wanted to collab with my 2 cents about. Do you remember what that was called?
I'll have to give you the link, but it was one of where that progressive voice was responding to Ben Shapiro about minimum wage, and basically Sahil was saying that rights come from the state.
Okay, yeah, no, 2 cents. That is something I want to collab with you on. That's actually something I want to collab with you on if I can find that. Okay, buddy.
Okay, let's find it. Let's do it. We're due for a collab here. So
beautiful, gorgeous. Love when a plan comes together.
All right, so we will. Everybody looking forward to that. I know my collabs with Night Shift have been some of your favorites. So, anyways, we will be back next week to discuss whatever the state is putting in the mainstream media to keep everyone distracted. Until then, that is my 2 cents. So, take it for what it's worth, and we'll see how long it takes to actually end the broadcast. I've noticed even when I hit the button, still takes a while for StreamYard to cut out.